I'm a Mexican girl living in a decent neighborhood. Not super fancy, but comfortable enough. My best friend has this habit of getting new phones all the time even when she doesn't need them. About 7 weeks ago, she offered to sell me her iPhone 11 at a really good price. Now, I'd only ever had an iPhone 9, so I was beyond excited about this upgrade. After buying the phone from her place, I was walking home wearing my mask, being responsible and all. I had on my usual casual outfit, just some Converse, sweatpants, and a white t-shirt. Nothing special, just comfortable clothes you'd wear to hang out with friends. I noticed this woman jogging ahead of me with a typical Karen haircut, not wearing a mask. To avoid any issues, I moved over to give her space. Apparently, that was the wrong move because she immediately scoffed at me. I found it weird that she was jogging so slowly. I mean, I was walking and she was barely ahead of me. Then I made what turned out to be a huge mistake. I stopped to check out my new phone, just admiring it for a moment. The second I pulled it out, this woman stopped dead in her tracks and walked back toward me. She had the nerve to tell me that I shouldn't be walking in this neighborhood because I clearly didn't belong there. I just stared at her, shocked. I tried to keep walking toward my house, but she wasn't done. She started screaming at me, calling me a witch and telling me this wasn't my neighborhood and that I didn't belong here. Then she started running straight at me. I took off running toward my house. When I got to my front steps, I could hear her still yelling behind me. I was trying to get my keys out, but I was shaking. She started screaming that I was breaking in and yelling for someone to call the police. Just as I got the door open, she grabbed my arm, the one holding the phone. She started accusing me of stealing the phone, screaming at the top of her lungs. I pulled back hard to get my arm free, which caused her to fall backward onto her back. I gave her the middle finger, ran inside, and locked every lock we have. Outside, I could hear her screaming about calling the police, so I immediately called my friend to bring over the paperwork for the phone purchase. My friend lives just 5 minutes away by car, so she arrived right after the police showed up. We spent almost an hour dealing with this situation, me giving my statement, showing the paperwork, while Karen just kept screaming and yelling. The police told me I was in the clear, and that's when Karen completely lost it. The commotion brought out several neighbors. Most of them went back inside, but the few who stayed got to witness her getting arrested for assaulting a police officer. I watched from my window as they drove her away in the police car. Since then, she still lives in the neighborhood, and I catch her throwing death glares my way sometimes, but she hasn't tried anything else. I guess assaulting a police officer taught her a lesson about making assumptions about people based on their appearance. My brother and I both work night shifts at different warehouses. The thing is, after working all night, our meal times are completely backward compared to normal people. This morning, around 6 a.m., we had just finished our shifts and were absolutely starving. We have this tradition where once a week, we treat ourselves to McDonald's breakfast after work. It's nothing fancy, but it's our thing, We've been doing it ever since we both started working nights 3 years ago. So there we were, pulling up to McDonald's in my slightly beat-up but reliable Honda Civic. The drive-thru had just opened, and there were only a couple of cars ahead of us. Everything was going normally until it was our turn to order. I pulled up to the speaker, and the employee greeted us with a standard McDonald's welcome and asked for our order. I had just started ordering our usual 2 sausage McMuffins with egg and a large coffee when we felt it. This sudden jolt from behind. My brother and I looked at each other, then at the rearview mirror. There she was in all her glory, a woman in a shiny BMW sporting that signature Karen haircut, and she had just rear-ended us. My brother and I got out of the car to check the damage. There was a noticeable dent in our bumper, while her car barely had a scratch. That's when she emerged from her BMW like she was ready for war. I confronted her about hitting our car, but she immediately turned it around on us. She started yelling about how we had reversed into her car instead. She even had the nerve to bring up how expensive her BMW was and suggested we couldn't afford to fix it. When I tried explaining that we were literally in the middle of ordering when she hit us, she accused me of lying and claimed she saw us reverse, calling it a scam. My brother was already taking pictures of both cars with his phone, which seemed to make her even more agitated. She started screaming about how taking pictures of her car was an invasion of her privacy and threatened to call the police. I told her to go ahead, since we had nothing to hide. She pulled out her phone and started dialing, all while putting on the performance of her life. On the phone with the police, she started crying about how we had damaged her car and were threatening her, claiming she felt unsafe and that we were being aggressive. My brother and I just stood there, completely dumbfounded. The drive-through employee who had heard the whole thing came out to check what was happening. When they mentioned seeing everything on the security camera, Karen snapped at them to mind their own business. About 10 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. Karen immediately rushed to them, crocodile tears and all, spinning a tale about how we had reversed into her car and threatened her. She even threw in that she was a single mother and felt scared. When the first officer asked me if her story was true, I denied it completely and explained that we were ordering at the speaker when she rear-ended us. I mentioned the drive-through cameras that would have caught everything. The second officer went inside to check the footage, while the first one kept us separated. Karen kept throwing glares our way while dramatically dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. After about 5 minutes, the second officer came back out. His expression had changed completely. He confronted Karen with the evidence from the footage, which clearly showed her hitting us from behind while we were stationary at the order speaker. Karen refused to accept this, screaming about how the footage must be fake and accusing us of paying the employees to doctor it. The officer had to cut her off, explaining that not only had she caused an accident, but she'd also made a false police report. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Karen then tried to intimidate everyone by bringing up her lawyer husband. The officer simply asked for her license and registration, staying calm throughout her tirade. It turned out she had an expired license. The officers ended up writing her multiple citations, one for the accident, one for driving with an expired license, and another for making a false police report. They also called a tow truck for her car since she couldn't legally drive it. When she was throwing a fit about her car being towed, the McDonald's manager came out and gave my brother and me each a bag, telling us our breakfast was on them and apologizing for the whole situation. We finally got back in our car, our free breakfast in hand, watching as Karen argued with the tow truck driver. My brother broke the tension by joking about how this was definitely a new one for our breakfast tradition. I played along, suggesting we might need to start going through the drive-thru in reverse now, just to live up to her story. We drove home, eating our hard-earned breakfast while watching the sunrise. The dent in my bumper was annoying, but knowing that Karen's morning was infinitely worse than ours made it a bit easier to swallow. Her insurance ended up paying for the repairs, and I heard through the McDonald's employee a few weeks later that she'd been banned from all their locations in the area. When my aunt passed away 25 years ago, I was just a baby. She left behind 2 cousins in their early 20s who suddenly had to figure life out on their own. Thankfully, my wealthy grandparents had set up their will so that if a parent passed before their children turned 30, those children would get half their inheritance early, with the other half coming after my grandparents' eventual passing. My younger cousin did well with her share. She paid off her college debt and bought some land where she still lives today. My older cousin, though, he burned through everything within 6 years. He ended up in a tiny condo, working as a police officer while battling a serious drug problem that ate up most of his salary. Over the next few years, my grandparents paid for him to go to rehab 3 times. He finally got clean when his girlfriend, now wife, got pregnant. She was absolutely awful. A nurse who clearly saw my grandparents as her personal ATM. She trapped my cousin by having 3 kids in 7 years, ensuring she was part of the family. They were always asking my grandparents for money, and being the kind souls they were, my grandparents always helped. My grandmother passed when I was 17, leaving just my grandfather. I was his favorite grandchild, which really got under my cousin and his wife's skin. I moved in with him for my last 2 years before college to help take care of him. They hated this so much that whenever they visited and I wasn't home, they'd send their kids to wreck my room. One day my cousin went as far as hiding one of those annoying noisemakers in my room cabinet. You know, the ones that beep randomly to drive you crazy. Thankfully, my German Shepherd kept hearing it and eventually found it. During a visit, things took a dark turn. I was out getting Grandpa's food when I came home to find my cousin, his wife, and my grandfather staring at my handgun on the table. I always kept it locked up with the key on a high shelf and never loaded. But there it was, loaded with a bullet in the chamber. My cousin immediately started yelling about how one of his kids had found the gun and had been playing with it, saying how lucky it was they caught them in time. When I told him that was impossible since I never kept it loaded and no 6-year-old could reach that key, he threatened me using his position as a police officer. He said he should arrest me but wouldn't, only because we were family, and ordered me to pack my things and leave. The next day, I tried explaining everything to my grandfather. I told him there was no way the kids could have gotten that gun since the key was too high and I never kept it loaded. Though he said he believed me, he suggested it might be better if I stayed with my parents until things cooled down. A month later, my grandfather died of a heart attack. I was crushed, especially since our relationship had been strained by my cousin's lies. Immediately after, my cousin and his wife started sucking up to my father, probably seeing him as their next meal ticket. Then came the will reading. There was one crucial line. Anyone who tried to claim estate items not assigned to them would lose their entire inheritance, which would be split among the remaining family members. My father, as the only surviving child, was to receive all physical property except for a few items set aside for me. That's when I hatched my plan. I called my cousin and casually mentioned that grandmother's jewelry collection was being donated to charity, adding that it was a shame since some pieces could probably put his kids through college. It worked perfectly. He rushed over to our grandparents' house to grab whatever he could. What he didn't know was that my father and the lawyer were heading there for an official inventory. My father later told me they found my cousin with 4 shoeboxes full of jewelry he was about to steal. When he realized I'd set him up, he started yelling accusations at me, saying I knew this would happen. I replied that I hadn't made him try to steal anything. That was all his doing. My father couldn't believe my cousin's actions, reminding him of everything my grandparents had done for him. The lawyer then explained that, according to the will, this attempt to claim unauthorized items meant he would forfeit his entire inheritance. His wife started screaming, demanding to know how they could get nothing and blaming my cousin for everything. He moved to another state after the divorce. His ex-wife tried contacting my father a few times for family support but was told to never contact us again. My other cousin still comes to family gatherings, and we've grown closer over the years. I've been teaching performing arts at my local high school for about 8 years now, and I absolutely love my job. Between directing theater productions and coordinating music events, I spend a lot of evenings at school well after regular hours. I also help out with athletic events, running the sideline chains and down markers for football games on Friday nights. It's a nice way to stay involved with the school community, plus I genuinely enjoy it. Now at our school, like many others, the sports teams and their booster clubs make some extra money by charging for parking during events. They usually start collecting fees about 3 hours before any game, even though most people only show up about 10 minutes before start time. Over the years, I've gotten to know most of the parent volunteers who handle the parking, so I usually just cruise through with a peace sign and they wave me right in. This Friday night was different though. I was running late for a football game where I was supposed to work the chains. Traffic had been horrible, and I knew kickoff was in less than 15 minutes. As I approached the parking entrance, I saw someone I didn't recognize. A middle-aged woman with that signature, "Can I speak to your manager" haircut. I did my usual routine, didn't slow down, gave a quick peace sign, and headed for my usual parking spot. That's when I heard her screeching at me to stop right there. I parked my car and grabbed my gear, hoping to make it to the field quickly, but she came charging across the parking lot like an angry rhino. She demanded to know who I thought I was and insisted that I needed to pay for parking like everyone else. I explained that I worked there as staff and mentioned that I was running late for the game. She scoffed at this, claiming that's what everyone says, and boasted about how she'd been doing this job for 3 whole weeks and knew every single staff member. I explained that I've been teaching there for 8 years as a performing arts teacher and that I was working the chains for the football game that night. She accused me of lying and threatened to call security, claiming I was trying to steal from the children. By this point, a small crowd had gathered, and I was getting seriously worried about missing kickoff. I reached into my pocket for my staff ID, but before I could pull it out, the head football coach came jogging over. He'd seen the commotion from the field. When the coach asked what was happening, Karen complained that I had driven past without paying and was falsely claiming to work there, emphasizing that she'd never seen me before in her life. The coach pointed out that this was because she'd only been there 3 weeks, and explained that I was indeed their performing arts teacher who needed to be on the field running the chains. Karen protested, asking how she was supposed to know and insisting that I should have stopped to explain. The coach pointed out that I was wearing a staff shirt and had a parking pass on my windshield. I pointed to my clearly visible school staff shirt and the parking pass hanging from my rearview mirror. Karen's face started turning red. She continued to argue, demanding that I should have stopped anyway and declaring that she was in charge of parking and demanded respect. The coach dismissed her claims, reminding her that she was just a volunteer who'd been there for 3 weeks, and told her that after this display, they wouldn't be needing her help anymore. She tried to protest by announcing her position as vice president of the Band Parents Association, but the coach told her that he could indeed dismiss her and was doing exactly that. When she threatened to call the superintendent, the coach encouraged her to do so, saying they'd surely be interested to hear about how she harassed a staff member and nearly delayed their game. The coach and I headed toward the field, leaving Karen spluttering in the parking lot. When we walked away, I could hear her still yelling about calling various authorities, but we just kept walking. The following Monday, I heard she had indeed tried to call the superintendent, which backfired spectacularly. Not only was she removed from all volunteer positions, but her attempt to paint herself as a victim in her email to the superintendent accidentally revealed that she'd been pocketing some of the parking fees for herself. Turns out her 3-week reign of parking lot terror had been quite profitable. The next Friday night game was much more peaceful. The regular parking volunteers were back, and I gave my usual peace sign as I drove through. One of them even joked about needing to see my parking lot credentials before we both burst out laughing. These days, whenever someone new is working the parking lot, the other volunteers make sure to point me out and explain who I am. It's become something of a running joke among the staff and regular volunteers.